Hey friends, welcome to the Permission to Be podcast. And welcome to the second conversation in our series of conversations entitled The Moment of Now. As I think about the moment of now and how we're moving through it, I want to say happy Pride Month and happy Juneteenth. These are such important memory-making events that we commemorate on a yearly basis that have their roots in emancipation and liberation. And I think that's such a beautiful place to ground us. In our conversation today with Dr. Obery Hendricks, who is also the author of Christians Against Christianity. Our dialogue today really gets to dance a beautiful dance between spirituality and politics and narrative of personal story. And I'm excited to share that with you. This conversation really helps to challenge me as I think about the concepts of left and right in these political terminologies, and also apply that into spiritual spaces, the impact and implications of locating ourselves within the left and the right. What is the left? What is the right? As we use these terms to sort of stake out political sides, what are we signaling? Is it important? I think as we have these conversations, we're here in the United States waiting on the ruling on abortion for the Supreme Court. We're witnessing the passage of a lot of anti-trans legislation and seeing a lot of rights rolled back as it relates to individuals' humanity, but especially queer people. And so what might there be within that for those who identify as Christian, to understand this moment of now, to understand the Christian right, the Christian left? I think there's also lessons in this conversation about organizing and social justice, to ground us in our actions for right now. And so if you want to continue these conversations, I just want to invite you to two spaces that we have going on right now to be able to process even some of these questions some more in different ways. One of those is Constanza Eliana's Anti-Oppression Academy, which is hosted on a Mighty Networks platform. I get to collaborate with her. We'll leave that link in the show notes, and I want to invite you into that community. But also the Patreon community here. You can find that at patreon.com/Tommy Allgood. And I don't want to overpromise, but I know there's some conversations around how we can be in more intentional community and regular community with you who listen to the podcast. And so if you're interested in digging into some of those questions about definitions and terms and implications, and thinking a little bit more deeply about what the moment of now requires from each of us, we want to invite you into those spaces, to practice anti-oppression, to practice liberation, to practice radical relationships. We will see you on the other side.
Hello, and welcome to Permission to Be.
Let's hit him with the remix.
Oh, well, y'all got to change that.
Yes.
What do we do?
We leave our F-bombs in and...
Let's tell some stories.
as long as white people are bound, the people in power are bound, they're going to keep us bound to the same thing that they're bound to.
Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I think out of the overflow of the spirit, the body does.
Challenge some narratives.
Why is that the best that God could offer you?
Mike made it very clear that he did not want to get any of these questions beforehand. So he is getting this question live, raw, for the very first time.
This is...
And I feel like art is the expression of the heart where words fail.
Oh my goodness, I have tears. Oh, y'all are killing it.
Unfiltered.
I feel like that's gotta sound strange.
Permission to be.
Actually, my literary agent, when we were talking about what book might I write, he was like, I mean, A Black Man with Hope is an interesting book.
Oh, shit. Good evening, friends. Well, I don't know when you're listening to this. So if it is evening for you, good evening. If it is morning for you, good morning. If it is wherever you are, hey, welcome to the Permission to Be podcast. We are so grateful to be with you. We have a really exciting, I think I say that a lot too, y'all. We have a really beautiful conversation before us today. Dr. Obery Hendricks, adjunct professor of Department of Religion and African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University, is with us. Dr. Hendricks also teaches at Yale. He was the past president of Payne Seminary, and he has written on topics like the politics of Jesus, rediscovering the true revelation, rediscovering the true revolutionary nature of Jesus' teachings and how they have been corrupted. In his latest book, let me just pull it up so I don't make sure that I name that correctly. His latest book is Christians Against Christianity: How Right-Wing Evangelicals Are Destroying Our Nation and Our Faith. Welcome to Permission to Be, Dr. Hendricks. How are you today?
Pardon me. That was not an editorial comment, that cough.
Welcome to being human.
Just having this allergy. No, things are well. I'd also like to mention that I am Professor Emeritus at New York Theological Seminary. I don't want to give them short shrift. I was there for about a dozen years. And so I do want to mention that. But all is well, thank you. You are
busy.
Well, I'm an adjunct. I mean, did I say adjunct? I mean, Professor Emeritus. Okay. I'm retired from there.
Okay.
Things are well. Just trying to negotiate this regime of, pardon me, this moment of manifest political evil that we are in. And I think to call it any less than a moment of evil is to give it short shrift. It's evil. Evil is when you harm innocent people just because you can, or to serve your own interests. That's evil, and we're seeing that every day go on in the political terrain on the part of the right wing, and so this is an evil time. And one of my favorite writers, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he wrote a book entitled An Evil Hour. And I think we're in evil hour now. So that's my long answer to your short question.
No, I mean, but that's it's really pertinent. It's really insightful. It contextualizes us for how we're coming to the conversation. We were talking a little bit beforehand of we're all kind of like, whoo, coming in. It's like, Lord, and so and just naming also the context of how you would describe like evil, and the forces that are happening in our political discourse and how that's affecting us, right? And so it's a beautiful container to shape our conversation with. I do want to give you space. This is permission to be, to maybe tell the audience a bit about yourself. You had mentioned you write to your aunt Kate when you're thinking about writing, and maybe just take some space to expound and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, I thank you. I was born in Farmville, Virginia, where schools were closed for 5 years rather than desegregate them. So I was born in segregation, believe it or not, born in struggle. I grew up, my family though moved north to Newark, and I grew up, I guess, other than growing up in church, my most important formative experience was in the Black Cultural Nationalist Movement, an organization headed by Mary Baraka. And I was a street soldier, and that shaped my understanding of what commitment to a cause is, and what, in the Christian context, what discipleship is. The total commitment to a principle. And in our case, though many of us soldiers were young and didn't know what was at stake, we had nonetheless a willingness to die for what we believed in. And don't ask me how, it's a long story, but I ended up years later on Wall Street. And from there, I was there about 8 years or so. There I got a good look at some of the internal workings of capitalism, and how deleterious it is to the spirit. I fell prey to the materialism of it, to the point where I valued people for what they had or who they knew for a good while, until I realized how badly I had fallen, and I extricated myself. Some years later, I found myself in seminary. Well, the process is, when my father died when I was 33, I was in his, I was speaking at his funeral, and standing in the pulpit, I didn't feel a calling to the ministry, but I realized that the church, which I had left, that the church was to be my site of struggle and service. I ended up in seminary a couple years or so later, and while in the seminary, I realized, thank the Lord, that my calling was not to the pastoral ministry, but that I had gifts, of scholarship. A Black woman, young Black woman at the time, Clarice Martin, who was a New Testament scholar, who's now at Colgate University. She convinced me that I could do a PhD, even though, no one in my world had anything near a doctorate. And I ended up at Princeton University under John Gager and Elaine Pagels, who wrote the Gnostic Gospels, both of whom had gotten death threats when they published their seminal works. John Gager, other advisor, he published a book on Paul. I don't recall the exact title, but in it he introduced the notion of cognitive dissonance into New Testament studies. They both got death threats. What that means to me is that there was nothing I could write that was too radical for them. So I was in a perfect place, and I really do believe that I was guided to be these places that I was. And then since then, I've been a biblical scholar. I've moved in the last decade or so more toward the intersection of religion and political economy. And that's where I am now. I'm on the advisory board of the Institute of Christian Socialism. And like Martin Luther King, I see that democratic socialism is closer to the biblical witness than capitalism. And that is where I sit, and that's where I stand right now.
I just wanted to just offer some commentary about my reading of the book. I didn't finish it, but about what stood out to me, and then ask you to.
Which book?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. You've written so many. the most recent one.
I'm gonna list them all.
Yes.
Christians against Christianity.
Christians against Christianity. So the one thing that I appreciate is that the way you intertwined story with the theological. And so it just made it so much more accessible. So you introduced it and you're telling about, the church you grew up in and this grandmother and the other grandmother and your mother with the red hair. And so I'm just so pulled into story. And then, you launch into the book. And I just find from a reader standpoint, because I'm not a theologian, so something that is just like all super heavy theology is going to lose me, but you did a beautiful job of interweaving story. But the story that leaped out at me, and I actually left Tommy and Becka a voice message earlier today and sent them clips of it, is the one that you opened with, which was the one about Farmville and the schools closing for 5 years. And so it is just so interesting to me that that's what you led with. And that story just leapt out at me because I am trying to imagine in my mind, my county shutting down schools for 5 years just to keep Black kids out, to keep any kids out. And the other thing that stood out to me about it is that I so often, I'm learning so much. I've learned more Black history, which is really American history, but this aspect of history in the last 5 years than I did in the prior 50. And I find a lot about, there was a lynching, or, I've learned about Tulsa and I've learned about riots and revolts and all these things. But what your story hit upon is the subtle ways of the impact of that. Because what you described is the schools closed down for 5 years. So then the white kids are able to go to private school. But then you've got all these Black kids a whole generation that didn't get past elementary school education. And therefore, when the schools opened back up, they'd gone into farming and other menial labor jobs. And then the long-term ramifications, even all these years later, is the poverty that resulted from that. And so I'd just love to have you share a little bit about that from your perspective, in your own words. Because that story really leapt out at me.
Well, what I in telling the story of my family, the depth of their involvement in the church, and about talking about Farmville. It's part of the narration of the horror of right-wing evangelicalism, because the schools being closed for 5 years, so-called Christian academies being opened for the white kids, which meant that we weren't supposed to be Christians, is orchestrated by Jerry Falwell and these heroes of right-wing evangelicals. And so as a result of closing the schools there in Virginia, Farmville, Virginia, which is the county seat of Prince Edward County, is the poorest town in Virginia today. And I know folks, I have relatives, who did not go beyond grammar school. Several cousins went to stay with relatives in other states, but young men stayed at home. And and also in telling about my family and our responses and how I grew up in the church, also I want to present a counterpoint to what passes for Christianity in this present moment, and that and also a counterpoint of Afro Christianity to mainstream or white Christianity. I grew up in a setting that was based on love, not just love of Black folks, but love, period. And we were taught to be good people, and that we should follow the model of the Good Samaritan, and love your neighbor as yourself was very real. And also, we're talking about real church community that's concerned about the common good, which is consistent with the biblical witness. It was not a congregation as audience. It was real community, and we children were lifted up. And I grew up, excuse me, in the 50s and 60s, graduated from high school in 71. But through the 50s and the 60s, it was a terrible time for Black folks. But then, and we were given a sense of somebodiness. I mean, we're talking about the depth of humanity that's reflected in Black church underlying theology. And I want to offer that as a counterpoint to what's going on today, which is not love-based, which is not about building community, which is individualistic and selfish, such that I don't have to wear a mask. I don't have to care about whether you'll catch COVID from me if I get it. And so that's why I shared that the way they did. And I also wanted to give a sense of the magnificence of the Black church experience of my youth, recognizing that many churches today, Black and white, really are audiences more than communities and congregations. And just to share that old model, that old time religion that helped and that empowered and inspired people, Black people, so much that we could persevere and grow. And a boy from segregated Farmville, Virginia, could actually believe that he could work on Wall Street, having not grown up around money at all or knowing anything about it. And so that was really the reasoning and the thinking behind starting autobiographically. And the last reason is this: I wanted folk who read the book realize I'm not writing as an outsider. I'm not criticizing as an outsider. I am an insider. So I have every absolute right to critique what's going on in the name of Christ.
I mean, I almost would say, I'm not sure from the history that I have learned, let me phrase it this way, from the history that I have learned, I'm not sure the white church has ever known that sense of community. Because of the privilege and entitlement. There's also a lack of leaning on each other. And I don't want to say, there's always exceptions. It's not a binary. But I think that I would assume, and please y'all correct me because I am the person who likes melanin in their skin in this room, but but for white people, I think, at least the history I know, that's threatening to see this. Look at these communities that love each other and take care of each other, and like the supremacy and the oppressor just wants to squash it. And the irony of that, you all were gathering in the truest form of what the Bible was portraying, and what Jesus's life portrayed. That is just those moving pieces. We really have to pull that out and just examine that, which is, I think, what you do and you talk about. And honored to sit here and be able to hear your story and hear that depth of community.
What's significant, I think, here is that mainstream Christianity, or we call it, I guess we call it white Christianity, has never been untainted by a stratum of oppression or opposition. Throughout the early history of this country, of course, it was tainted by slavery. It allowed slavery, and then on up through to today. And that has never been the case for Afro-Christianity. It's not been oppositional. It's not been oppressive. It's been, we might situate it in the resistance discourse, as opposed to mainstream, which was, which I guess we call a discourse of domination, because it always had element of domination. So those are the differences there. I think that's an important difference, I believe.
I have a question about your writing of the book. So what is crystal clear to me, both from reading it and from having lived it, the last church I was in was probably 90% white. So it was very much a white evangelical church. And I didn't fully realize a lot of things until 2015. And you know what happened in 2015. So, and so I know from the opening sentence, it's very clear you want to, counter / expose, the whole degradation of the Christian message by the evangelical right. So my question to you is, well, twofold. One, who is your target audience? And the second part is, by bringing these details to light, what do you hope, when a person gets to that final chapter, how do you've put this message out into the world? What do you want to accomplish? What do you hope the end is? When somebody closes this book, having read this, your hope is that?
Yeah, good question. Christians against Christianity. I really, I guess I had a couple of goals. One was I say in there in the introduction, I think it's time to tell the truth or something like that. I forget the exact phrase I used, but it's time to set the record straight. That's what I said. I want to set the record straight because the loudest voices in Christendom are from the right-wing evangelicals. We who are not right-wing evangelicals have a lot. We bear a lot of the fault for that being the case, because we've not been loud enough, we've not been active enough, on progressive left, and so they are okay. Get some words, Obery. They are dominating the discourse. So I wanted to push back. I wanted to show that so many of their positions, so many of the positions that they stand on and that they claim to be informed by their reading of the Bible, I want to show that they're not biblical at all, and that in a real sense, so much of what they are about is literally anti-Christian, in the sense of anti-gospel. It's anathema to the gospel. It's and it's anti because it is opposed to the gospel. And so there are those who are confused, who know no better. I hope to reach some of them, and so far it seems I've been able to some extent, from the responses I've gotten. And I hope, maybe against hope, to make a dent in some of those who really are who are right-wing evangelical believers, but I realize that so many of them are in that group of people because not for reasons of faith, but reasons of ideology and interests. And some of them are just hateful and racist, and they know a fellow hateful racist person when they see it, so they support Donald Trump. And those people, there's no reaching them. You know, we've always had them in America. I'd like to think, though, that most of them are sincere. They're just sincerely wrong. I don't know. I mean, it's really questionable. But that's what I hope to do, to reach some folks, to at the very least to evoke some dialogue, some discourse, maybe some questions, and not just attacks on me. Which is why I wrote the introduction the way that I did, to let them know that I know what I'm talking about. I blew my horn a little bit about my qualifications, you know, and I'll tell you, and that's why I made sure to document everything that I said. And of all the attacks that I've read, nobody has said anything substantive. They said this is a hateful book, or it's wrong, but they don't take issue with anything that I've said, because frankly, I don't think they can counter those claims, because they're just wrong. They are wrong, and yeah, and I'm right.
One of the things that it did for me that I found helpful, I have an older friend, not that he's just older than me. He's 74, and he is a former college professor and spent his whole life, you know, in social justice work and whatnot. And I was on Zoom with him a couple of Sundays ago, because when I get really exasperated with these types of things, he's the person I go to, and like, he's lived through all the civil rights stuff and everything else and knows everybody. And so he's constantly challenging me when I say, you know, these Christians and the hypocrisy, and he's like, right-wing evangelical Christians, it is not all Christianity.
It's not all evangelical.
He's constantly on me. And so reading your book, I was reading your words, and I could just hear him in my ear saying, this is what I'm talking about. It's, oh, you were so traumatized, because I've not been back to, it was just such a horrific experience. We had been in that church for like 15 years and didn't realize we were the acceptable Negro until well, we got a hint of it when Obama became president, but even then it wasn't in your face type thing. But come 2016, 2015, with the primaries and these people that I had been in community with all these years were like, the ones who said Bill Clinton was unfit because of Monica Lewinsky are excusing a thrice divorce adulterer, Carnival Barker. And it was just jarring for my husband and I after all this time. And so I left and I've not gone back. And so when I get on my high horse and start, he's like, but you are talking about white Southern evangelical Christianity. And I am telling you, that is not the totality of it. There is another side. And I want you to stop saying that is Christianity. That is white evangelical right-wing Christianity. And you're broad brushing the whole thing. And so reading, to the point that I got to with your book, just kind of underscored that, because the people the things that you're describing, that's what I was in.
It's important because evangelicalism was much of it was very progressive and socially humane up until pretty much up until FDR. But the major abolitionists, most abolitionists were evangelicals, and there were anti-capitalist evangelicals. There were evangelicals who supported the equality of women and who supported unions, and on down the line. There was even one gentleman, I think I write about him in the book. Yeah, he actually he was calling for the kinds of protections that we wouldn't see for decades and decades later, protections of labor. And so they were very progressive. So it is important talk about that. But if I might just say why it changed. When FDR became president, he changed the philosophy of government from laissez-faire, like the government has no responsibility to care for the poor and the vulnerable, and that was the governmental philosophy. He changed that, said that no, we do have a responsibility to care for the least of these, and so we know his whole New Deal. That's what was new about it. It was a New Deal to take care and recognize responsibility for the welfare of the people, which is in line with the biblical witness. Because when we go through it, we find that princes and kings and those in governance and positions of authority are told to stand up for justice and righteousness and to care for the poor and the vulnerable, right? And they were specific about that. And so although Roosevelt was much more in line with biblical ethics and biblical witness, the fact that he was that rich people were no longer the focus of government. Government was no longer focused on serving the interests of the rich and the wealthy and the capitalists, but was concerned about those in need. Well, those who were rich, they couldn't believe it. I mean, and I quote in Christians Against Christianity, I share a couple of the quotes that they of the kinds of things they said. So what did they do? They started an offensive against FDR and the New Deal. They formed the American Liberty League. They misused liberty then, just like they misuse it now. The DuPont brothers and other rich capitalists formed that, and they went out and found a right-wing evangelical preacher, a Reverend Feifeld, and they sponsored him to start an organization called Spiritual Mobilization, which had nothing to do with spirituality or mobilizing anything but money. And Feifeld started this evangelical movement to support the rich and the powerful, and to denigrate social safety net and all of that. And that has remained their political philosophy since that time. So we see that radical break at that moment, and it's still the same. And one example is that they demonized socialism. They demonized socialism as being of the devil and all of that. When socialism is much more humane, democratic socialism, much more humane than capitalism, and they're doing the same thing today. We have socialism already: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. That's socialism, but still they demonize socialism because it helps average people. And Harry Truman said that anything that helps everyday people, they will demonize and reject and call it socialism, when really it is just humane treatment and acknowledgement of people's needs. So that's sort of how we got where we are today. But we recognize that there are still progressive and left wing evangelicals. And so yes, your friend is right. We don't want to put them all. We don't want to put William Barber and Jim Wallace and all those folks. We don't want to smash them in with the miscreants on the right wing, like Paulo White, that sad sack, and people like that. Early on, I said I tried to address some of the fallacious biblical interpretations that right-wing evangelicals stand on, and I think it's important, to say that, for instance, that by their own admission, often they aren't really Bible centered. For instance, there was a poll taken asking right-wing evangelicals if the Bible told if they were if their attitude about immigration was influenced by the Bible. And I think something like more than half of them said no, the Bible has nothing to do with it, which is just crazy because I mean, one of the main tenets of the Hebrew Bible is to look out for the ger, that you can translate it as stranger or immigrant. I mean, we find throughout, and it also says that even tithing was prescribed. I believe it's in the book of Malachi. One of the reasons for tithing is to help take care of immigrants until they get on their feet. So I had to point that out. I had to also point out that even though right-wing evangelicals have elevated abortion to the litmus test for whether you are really a Christian or not, that the Bible does not address abortion, much less say that it is a sin, and it doesn't. Well, it doesn't address voluntary abortion. In Exodus 21, verses 22 and 23, it does talk about if a woman is pregnant, men are fighting, and the woman's injured and her fetus is injured or killed, that the punishment is an eye for an eye for the mother, the woman who's walking the earth, but it's only a financial fine for the fetus. It makes a distinction between the two of them. And I'm not saying that abortion is right or wrong. I'm just talking about what the Bible says. The only place that we have any notion of a voluntary abortion is in Numbers 5, in which it says that if a woman is found to be, if a woman is impregnated by someone other than her husband, the punishment is that the fetus she is carrying will be aborted by God. Okay, and these things need to be pointed out. Why? Because we have a whole movement. They elected this sick piece of trash as president because he said that he was against abortion. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't care one way or another. He doesn't care about anything or anyone. But they have misused the Bible and weaponized it to mislead people, to get them all worked up in order that these people might serve their interests, to become dominant in America, so that we all will be forced to genuflect at the altar of their specious and distorted readings of the Bible, and on down the line. The same with homosexuality. I worked hard to show that in the handful of sayings in the Bible, passages in the Bible that are supposed to demonize homosexuality and presented as a sin. When you look at them in historical and cultural context, when you translate the Hebrew and the Greek terms correctly, it becomes clear that what the Bible says is too ambiguous about same gender loving relationships to deny anyone's humanity, to demonize them, to pass laws that criminalize them. It's just absolutely wrong. Not only that, it's wrong from the beginning, because Sodom and Gomorrah was not about homosexuality. It was about gang rape. And the reason why Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed was for lack of hospitality. We see that Ezekiel says that. Jesus implies that in Mark, and we see it some other places. So I wanted to point out how they get so many things wrong. How the NRA, you have people with Christian churches holding services to sacralize, to consecrate, and to bless AR-15s, which were developed to kill people, and saying that there's a God-given right to own guns. It has nothing to do with God, but these things are continue to be articulated and repeated and get people worked up, but has nothing to do with Jesus and the gospel. And for Christians, it is anti-Christian, it is blasphemous to say these kinds of things and to lie to the people about them, to get them to to be part of a dominationist movement, which is what it is now. So I wanted to share that to give some sense to folks of just how wrong these people are in their use of the Bible.
Yeah, one of my writing mentors, Lisa Sharon Harper, that's the whole thing of even the term evangelical. She talks about, like, she's like, I'm not even willing to relinquish the term evangelical. and she cites the history. Oh, you've already got your copy of it?
Yeah, I blurbed it, so she sent it out. It's such a great, the book is not in, but it's in a kit. It has all kinds of stuff. Anyways.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we talked to her. We've already interviewed her for Fortune, and I've been in her writing group for since April 2020. But she, like I said, she even took it a step further that, I'm not relinquishing the term evangelical, and it's because of the history that you just cited. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, you already know that. One thing that I wonder from your perspective, you talked about, the intersection of religion and politics. And I live in the state of Georgia. And so, we're the ones who had the Republican Secretary of State who stood up to Trump and refused to manufacture 11,000 votes. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'm not going to, rig an election. And so the Georgia legislature has responded to that by doing what has been done throughout history, rewriting the law. It has just been such a history lesson for me. I mean, I read about these things from the 50s and 60s about, the laws, and even going back further, Reconstruction, the Black codes, and how law was used to abuse and oppress. But I didn't think I would be seeing it played out in my home state in 2021. So they've rewritten the law, and it's going to make it much easier to manipulate the vote in 2022 and 2024. So I guess my question, the question that I have about all of that is, when you look at the political landscape, because I know you're aware, Georgia's not the only state that has done it, Arizona, right, and some other states. What gives you hope now? Like, when you look at the hijacking of conservative Christianity and the whole white nationalism infused with white evangelicalism, what gives you hope? Because sometimes, I'll be honest, my father is 80, and he's living through some of these things twice in one lifetime. And at times I just feel like I'm not going to see substantive change. Yeah. So what gives you hope?
I don't know that I have hope. I don't know what else to do than to continue to struggle. That's our gospel responsibility. But I think if there's something that gives me hope, it might be sort of perverse in that the hatred and the racism and just the manifest sickness is just going so far that it might just end up discrediting themselves. If I have a hope, that's my greatest one, because we don't see a lot of vision, or it doesn't appear there's a lot of vision or character or political courage on the progressive side to counter these people. Not only that, Barack Obama said when he first got into the presidency, I think he said when he was campaigning first, that it is important to acknowledge, one's religious values. I mean, religious discourse must be part of the political discourse, but we haven't learned that on the progressive side yet. And so it's so easy to paint us as godless and all that, and being able to ground one's politics in biblical ethics in a so-called biblical country in this day and age is a great deal of power, but that's power that we're not calling on. And so, I don't see our side waging a strong fight to defeat them. The only thing that I know is that evil can't prevail forever. I don't believe that it can. And I just think that they're going so far that they're going to just blow themselves up and show everybody just how evil they are. Because if this guy Kennedy from Mississippi could actually make the racist statement he made today about he's upset about this whole thing about a black woman being appointed Supreme Court judge because he wants somebody who can tell the difference between a law book and some kind of a retail catalog. I mean, that is just so bald-faced that hopefully that'll wake people up and make people see how sick that is. And I guess one more thing, they might just really, it's starting to look like they might really be able to show what we already know, that Donald Trump is a traitor to this country who tried to overthrow government and dismantle democracy. If that is the case, a lot of people who are somewhat in the middle and maybe just leaning his way, if it's handled right, that might wake some folk up. That's all I can think of. Other than that, I don't know. It's a scary time, and it's getting more dangerous every day.
I'm always, I guess for me, as I'm listening to your story interweave with your expertise, and also like in the culture, recognizing like this is my elder and like all the things that I'm learning. I do feel hopeful, but I just kind of wanted to take a little bit of space and maybe name some of the deep observations that I've made as we've had this conversation. Starting with first the story of your childhood and growing up in a time and living through where people actually took education away from people, the deep trauma of this. And the choice to have to support yourself to go to work, but also the injury to the body. To personhood, to humanhood. To have that experience, but also be, I don't want to say insulated, because I would say even though the Black church has been this rock for us, there's also been this place of deep pain and hurt people, and we know hurt people hurt people. And then I think what I hear in your story is journey, and that we often look and try to fit people into these like clean, uncomplicated boxes. And I sit in a space and time where, like, I don't know. I'm wrestling with the definition of Christian, to be quite honest.
Yeah, yeah. May I interject right there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is why in Christians Against Christianity, I try to, I identify the core of the gospel. Well, not identify it. I share what Jesus said is the core of the gospel, right? He said that um, that that equal to loving God or equal to the greatest commandment is loving our neighbor as ourselves, right? Okay, and so we know that it's love your Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. But in terms of the horizontal, that includes us, in society. The commandment, the primary commandment, is love your neighbor as yourself. Want for your neighbor the goods, the security, the resources, the love, the good health, the freedom from oppression for your neighbor and your loved ones as we want for ourselves. That is, he said, the primary horizontal or social commandment for us. And then he gave us a mode of judgment, which is the main mode of judgment that he gives us in the Gospels. And that's, of course, Matthew 25, 31 through 46. And it says that if you have tried to help somebody, to take care of somebody, to be concerned about the common good, the poor, and all of that, and those in need, then you go the right hand, you go to heaven. But as you have not done it to the least of these, you have not done it to me. And it says, and the judgment is when you do not try to help people in the world, and you do not try to make a difference. I guess conversely, when you, and that is when you hurt people, that's when you go to hell, right? And so those, by Jesus' own estimation, by his own mouth, that's the core of the gospel. So when you talk about what is a Christian, we also keep in mind that Jesus gave no doctrines, right? He gave no theology, like a systematic theology, no theological doctrines. He gave ethics, how we are to live in the world, how we're to treat one another. Even the kingdom of God is relational when you really look at the way he describes it. And so what I'm suggesting is that what is a Christian? Well, to my mind, and this is how I approach Christianity, it is someone who takes seriously and tries to live by the ethics that Jesus taught, right? And so I'm not a Trinitarian. I don't get into the Holy Trinity and all that because I don't have to, because it's not, Jesus didn't say anything about that. The closest we come in the gospel is a mistranslation of 1 John chapter 5. And so you see what I'm saying? And the problem began, brother, with Constantine in the 4th century. Jesus brought a faith of the oppressed, right? When Constantine became the sponsor of Christianity, he declared himself the 13th apostle appointed by God, which meant nobody could question him. It's at that point that the faith of the oppressed became the official religion of the oppressor. And at that point, it became what you believed and what you confessed became more important than what you did, how you lived. For Jesus, it was how you lived in the world, how you treated people. After that, when you have all these councils that were sponsored by the empire, at that point it becomes what you believe, what you confess becomes more important. So folk can ask, is Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior? What that got to do with you? What I have to do? I mean, judge how I'm living. I can say anything. Charles Manson said he was a Christian, So I hope that's helpful. But anyway, that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, that is I always like to lob it out there because it's the other part of that is I'm a Christian depending on who's asking.
Yes. Well, you don't have to call yourself anything.
Exactly, and that's the other piece that I want to add, because there was one review that I came across, and the person said that he was an atheist and found deep meaning in your book and who it was centering, but even helping him to understand and put language to. And so even for me, I'm in the space of looking at that universal thing that we're being pulled to, right? And that we're being pointed to, and Christians would say through Jesus' example. But then also knowing that the divine is in all of us and all around us. And so I think it grieves me, to circle back around, when the elders who have been through so much articulate their truth about the deep despair that they feel in their body, in their bones, because they've been through so much and held so much. And I want the audience to not hear loss or lack of hope, but truly hear the weight of walking through the difficulty of white supremacy, the oppression of white supremacy and racism on the body.
And seeing it raise its head anew in such a crushing fashion. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I'm thinking about Olivia's father, and having gone through a second time. I mean, there was a point just a few years ago, we would have never believed that the Pandora's box would be opened again, like it has been. So I guess, folk have suffered so much, and then we get a Black president, and there are many people, I can remember so many elders, Obama could do no wrong because he was a fulfillment of their hopes that they never thought would be fulfilled. But then, after living through that, just a few years later, we have a virulent racist, a cancer on the backside of humanity, who's the most powerful man in the world again. So yes, Thomas, it's got to be horrible for them. It's horrible for me, man. I mean, it's horrible for all of us. And I fear for my grandchildren, and I have a 4-year-old great-granddaughter. I mean, I can't imagine what their life is going to be like. And these next couple years will determine, I think, what the quality of our lives will be like for decades to come. It's frightening. Yeah, it's bad.
I think that's the part that gives me hope, is that we're in that period now where we can determine. And so as you are doing your part in a sector and aspect, and it feels like, I think what we may be unlocked with the protests and George Floyd is that we have more resources, that we have technology and social media, and though the center of that fight, as it once was maybe in the Black church or evangelicalism, maybe the center of that is shifting. So I have hope. And I think we still use those tried and true tactics of organizing, and alongside of, it's tired. And so we pass that torch down, and we each have to do that responsibility of healing our part. I think
Yes,
it is exhausting.
That's a good point. I mean, we look at Black Lives Matter movement and young people getting involved, that's a sign of hope. What is what raises a question for me though is their very admirable dedication to democratic decentering of the movement. And so there, I'm not going to say there's not a coherent strategy, but there's not, I don't think it's incoherent, but we're not seeing the kind of marshaling of forces working together that that can change, and hopefully it'll change. And I think that if we, in the progressive part of the church, try to help and just to share, to articulate an ethical foundation for them, which they could use prescriptively. In other words, it could prescribe what they would do and what they wouldn't do, or analytically a basis, ethical basis, by which they can analyze actions and policies and all that. Will give it a bit more coherence, but it also can bring so many more people into the flock. If Christians would stop being so doggone Christian, like the main thing the most important thing on earth is that, you have to be a Christian, you have to confess Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Jesus never said that. Jesus said, follow me. And if we've got folk to realize what's important is how you live and how you act in the world, that is the only measure of real spirituality, relationship with God. If we could do that and come together with these young people, my God, what a powerful movement that would be. So from my perspective, I'm trying to be a part of that to whatever extent I can. And there are others are doing the same. We just have to keep fighting it, pushing it.
That last part, that was a whole sermon right there. You're like, that'll preach. Yes.
Yeah, but not many preachers will be preaching it, unfortunately.
No, and I spent a lot of time. I'm the old person in this trio. Tommy's the youngest person who could literally. My oldest child is actually older than him, and so. But I spend a lot of time talking to my young friends, examining. Here I am in my mid 50s. Like, what does Christianity even mean to me at this point? And I just had a discussion with my husband today, very similar to what you said. It's like all this theology and all this, if you believe these 10 right things, doesn't matter what you do, but if you believe these 10 or 8 or 5 right things, and we would just look at each other, it's like, that can't be it. It can't just be all in your head and have no bearing on what you do. And my husband made the point of, people within your father's lifetime were going to church on Sunday, leaving church and going to lynching picnics. Like, the disconnect with that. And so I appreciate you saying what you did, because you're just reiterating a conversation that I had earlier, that there has got to be some fruit in my life. There's got to be some manifestation in my life. To quote James Baldwin, I don't care what you say, because I see what you do.
Exactly.
And that just means the world to me. So I appreciate you saying that.
I would think Jesus would say the same thing, and we hear, I've heard stupidity. You all probably heard the same thing. Something like, well, Mahatma Gandhi was a good man, but he never accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. So unfortunately, he's in hell. That's just plain stupid and has nothing to do with the gospel. Mahatma Gandhi lived the gospel. He lived it like Jesus said. And so he didn't make a certain confession, but that just shows how backward and how distorted it all has become.
I imagine If some listeners are sticking with us to this point, a lot of emotions and feelings have came up, and I just invite us to hold that tension, because this is the work of extracting ourselves out of those strands of teachings that were rooted in white supremacy and designed to dominate our bodies and alienate us from one another. And that rewiring is uncomfortable. And to your point, it feels like this is one of those moments where, for me, this is a redemptive conversation because it's about this reclamation. Like we're getting to reclaim and
Yeah.
redefine,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
also this nod to there's one truth spoken in many languages.
Jesus said, I have other sheep not in this flock, right?
Yeah, I think that's necessary too when I think about the movements and the various entry points where people are from either dismantling something, stepping into a new way of being. And so for me, on my journey to affirming myself as a queer person, like now I'm beyond sort of this apologetics, but the value of having a guide way out of some of the socializations that we've been taught in white evangelicalism and how they've worked their way up into law and in public discourse. Your work has created such value for people on that space, and so we just want to thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate what you're doing and the depth of your thought and your critique and your commitment, because we're in a war. We are in a war against evil in this, and we can't pussyfoot around with it because they're not playing with us. So I commend you and thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you.
Because it is so heavy, because it is re-traumatizing. Our current state of this nation. What do you do personally to have a little peace? What brings you joy, in the midst of all of this?
Family, I have two extraordinary granddaughters, 21 and 23, and they're wonderful. We're very close. I've witnessed their birth, and very close. And I have a 4-year-old great granddaughter who is, you can imagine, apple of my eye. And so, and I have a good home life. I have a wonderful wife, and that helps. But I've been traumatized, really. I must admit, I've realized that I've withdrawn from folk. I don't go out like I used to. Well, with COVID, nobody does. But I mean, I don't stay in touch with my friends like I used to. And I don't know that other than that, I have a lot of joy, sources of joy. We get, eruptions of it in my classes sometimes. And that is satisfying. But other than that, just struggling through. It's really like with everyone else who's really paying attention. It's really hard to keep spirits up. We don't know what's happening. So that's what I try to do.
I tell you what, when you were talking about your granddaughters and your great granddaughter, your whole face lit up. You were beaming.
I can't help it. Yeah, they're wonderful. They're wonderful. And as you know, I dedicate the book to them. And I much, not just my granddaughter's great granddaughter. I have two lovely daughters as well.
Oh yes, there's your children as well.
Yeah, but they get lost in the sauce. It's like one of my daughters asked, I mean, God, Daddy, what? I mean, like she would come and bring my granddaughters, and I would go and hug them. She said, "But I'm here too." You know?
I mean, but I've had more life with you, girl.
Yeah, right. But she really, she really, was really hurt. Like, why are you ignoring me? But yeah,
I'm just joking.
it's a good part. It's a good part of life.
I will just say thank you so much for even for the difficult parts it is to sit and hear. Sometimes thank you for telling the truth about your experience, and also putting pieces and puzzles, the puzzle of the truth that's been fragmented back together. So thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate that, and I hope we can do this again sometime. It'd be great.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes.
All the best, and by the way, you might share my website is OberyHendricksPhD.com.
Okay.
OberyHendricksPhD.com is my website for the book, and I have all kinds of stuff on there. Okay, folks.
Thank you so much.
Yo, that was our show. Thanks for listening to Permission to Be. Thank you to our guests. So if you want more information, head on over to permissiontobepodcast.com to check out the show notes, get some more information on our guests that we post over there. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, leave a rating. If there's somebody that you want to see on this podcast telling their story, we also want to hear from you. So make sure to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Permission to Be Podcast, and we'll see you soon.